We've all probably heard of lost media, where a piece of media is thought to no longer exist. There's many pieces of Thomas the Tank Engine lost media that people have known about for years, like the sad story of Henry from 1953, the missing coach, and Barry the Rescue Engine, among others. But there are some Thomas episodes that are lost, which were considered disturbing and shocking. So let's begin looking at the Thomas the Tank Engine lost episode Creepypastas. Thomas and the Children. Thomas and the Children was an episode of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. It is unknown what series this was from, but it can be assumed it was made between series 8 and 11, possibly as a joke by the production crew, released by accident. The only known story of someone watching this episode came from an anonymous father many years ago. The father's son adored Thomas. He could name every single engine, knew what colour they were, and the number they had painted on them. When the summer holidays came, he went to visit his father. Despite being busy with work, the father wanted to make sure his son was entertained, so he bought him a Thomas DVD. The cover looked harmless, Thomas smiling cheerfully, little wooden children waving from the windows of his coaches Annie and Clarabelle. The title read, Thomas and the Children. The son was thrilled. The moment he saw the DVD, he begged his father to put it on. While the father worked, he sat in the living room to watch it. Hours later, he appeared at his father's office door, pale as a sheet. Daddy, his voice was barely above a whisper. When his father asked what was wrong, the son's eyes welled with tears. Why did Thomas kill the children? His father tried to reassure him, sent him to bed, and went to see for himself what had frightened his son so badly. The episode began normally enough. Thomas had been assigned by the Fat Controller to take a group of children to the seaside. But something was immediately off. There was no narrator. One by one, the wooden children climbed on board, their painted smiles frozen as Thomas puffed down the tracks. Then came the familiar line, but then there was trouble. Bertie the bus sat stranded on the railway tracks, staring in fear as Thomas approached, but instead of slowing down, Thomas accelerated, laughing. The children screamed. The crash was brutal, and when the dust settled, luckily no one was hurt. Inside Annie and Clarabelle, the wooden children were torn apart, limbs shattered, red stains splattered the seats, and the smiling faces now looked twisted by terror. Tears, painted or not, streamed down their cheeks. Then the screen turned to static. Hidden in the noise were flickering words. Kill, obey, multiply, die. They flashed too quickly to read all at once, but the pattern went on and on. When the father finally stopped the DVD, he snapped it in half and threw it away. That night, the son slept soundly, clutching his teddy bear. His father didn't. In his dreams, the wooden children were no longer small. They were life-sized. Their splintered arms reached out to grab him as Thomas's laughter echoed from somewhere in the dark. When morning came, the house was silent. The father awoke in bed, drenched in blood, a knife in his hand, too terrified to check his own son's room. 1981 early reel. In the very early days of the online Thomas fandom, an anonymous user bought and received a job lot of early Thomas videos. These came from a seller on eBay. The auction's description mentioned that several of these videos were actually given to him prior to the release of the series, implying that the seller originally worked on the show in some way. Some of these early tapes he sent the user were in relatively good condition, with many of them being earlier versions of certain episodes. The video that grabbed his interest the most, however, was a video simply called Early Reel, which is believed to have been filmed in the early 80s, alongside the original pitch pilot Down the Mine. The video starts with a crowded Knapford station and an early crude version of Thomas with painted, unmoving eyes. Thomas departs and passes Percy, then is mistakenly sent down the wrong line. His expression becomes unnervingly human, terrified as he speeds down a steep gradient. He crashes through a level crossing, hitting a car, and derails off a cliff. The crash is violent, accompanied by screams, suggesting the death of his crew. After the crash, Thomas's wreckage burns while eerie music plays. A Latin phrase is heard, which translates to English as, "It is fortunate that no one is harmed." It is heard before the screen fades to black, and a message appears. "There is nothing quite like it," which was the Northwestern Railway's motto in the Railway series, and then it's followed by a 1981 copyright notice. The scene shifts to a ghostly, rusted version of Thomas, rolling along a decayed branch line. His face is gone, replaced by a loose smoke box door that clangs open to reveal what looks disturbingly like a rotten flesh inside. He reaches a scrapyard and stops before a man holding a cutting torch. The screen fades to black. The final segment shows a hand-drawn image of rows of destroying steam engines, including a mangled, barely recognizable Thomas among them. The soundtrack consists of birds chirping and a long dying steam whistle that grows distorted, adding to the unease. The tape ends after briefly flashing the same image again, now tinted red, before fading out completely. James's Bad Day. The third series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends was first released on VHS in the United Kingdom in November 1991. The series had 26 episodes. Thomas and Percy's Christmas Adventure was the final episode of the series, but there was a 27th episode. It was written between Diesel Does It Again and Henry's Forest. The episode was titled James's Bad Day. The episode begins with James pulling a goods train in a sequence identical to No Joke for James, but the visuals are duller and the audio is distorted. The narration is slow and monotone. As the episode continues, James looks sad, and the sound disappears entirely. At the sheds, Gordon and Henry cruelly mock James in demonic voices, suggesting he could be scrapped next. James stares at the viewer before a disturbing image flashes briefly, showing Thomas and Percy thrown into a volcano. He then travels down an abandoned track, crying as his red paint turns dark. From here, the episode splits into two different versions. In the UK version, James encounters damaged, faceless versions of Thomas and Percy, who appear burnt. He becomes possessed, declaring, "This will be your fate," and begins laughing demonically. After a violent sequence where James shoots and destroys Gordon, he crashes and is mangled at the bottom of a mountain. The final scene shows horrifically disfigured remains of Thomas, Percy, and James, while Diesel, Gordon, and Henry laugh as Diesel warns Edward, Duck, and Toby, "You're next." In the US version, James finds himself in a cemetery surrounded by engine parts. He hears demonic laughter and voices of Gordon and Henry saying, "You're next." He stops before two gravestones, bearing the birth and death dates of narrators George Carlin and Michael Angelos, and cries human-like tears. And what was more disturbing was that these death dates were actually accurate to how they actually died, despite this episode being produced in 1991. The final scenes show an abandoned Tidmouth sheds with rotting engines and James weeping on a turntable as Diesel, Gordon and Henry laugh. After the credits, a single frame of Toby's face mask on a pile of wood flashes on screen.